Lieutenant Caleb Rourke had been working as a technical advisor to the Keth'var military for 6 months, helping integrate human communication technology with their existing infrastructure. It was supposed to be safe diplomatic work. No combat, no field deployment, just technical consultation in controlled military facilities. Then the insurgent attack hit the northern communications hub where Caleb and Keth'var commander Zyrenna had been reviewing system upgrades. The explosion came without warning, coordinated strikes that took out power, communications, and security simultaneously. Insurgent forces poured into the facility before Caleb even understood what was happening. Zyrenna grabbed him and pulled him into a maintenance corridor as plasma fire tore through the command center where they'd been standing seconds before. "Move," she hissed, her elongated Keth'var features rigid with combat focus. "Emergency extraction protocols are compromised. We need to reach the secondary armory." They ran through corridors that became progressively more damaged, past bodies of Keth'var soldiers who hadn't reached cover in time, through sections where the ceiling had collapsed and emergency lighting flickered erratically. Zyrenna moved with the fluid precision of someone trained for exactly this kind of chaos. Caleb struggled to keep up, his civilian technical training utterly inadequate for navigating active combat zones. Here, Zyrenna pulled him into what looked like a storage room, sealing the door behind them. "We wait for extraction teams to secure the facility. How long will that take?" "Unknown. Communications are down. Could be hours." They waited in tense silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only 40 minutes. Then voices in the corridor. Insurgent forces conducting room-by-room searches, executing any Keth'var military personnel they found. The door exploded inward, breached by insurgent forces who swarmed into the room with weapons trained on both of them. "Down, both of you down now." Caleb dropped immediately, hands visible. Zyrenna lowered her weapon slowly, her movements controlled even as insurgents forced both of them to the ground. They were searched, restrained, and dragged into the corridor where other captured personnel were being assembled. Caleb counted 12 prisoners, all Keth'var military except him. The insurgent commander walked down the line of prisoners, assessing each one. When he reached Caleb, his expression shifted to something between surprise and calculation. "A human, technical advisor based on your uniform insignia." He looked at Zyrenna. "And you're the commander responsible for this sector. Interesting pairing." "He's civilian," Zyrenna said immediately. "Non-combatant. Release him under insurgent protocols regarding non-military personnel." "Insurgent protocols," the commander repeated mockingly. "You mean the ones your military ignores when it's convenient? We don't follow those anymore. The human dies with the rest of you." Zyrenna's entire body went rigid. "He's not, unless," the commander interrupted. "You'd like to make this interesting. The human runs, you have 30 seconds to execute him yourself before we execute you both. If you succeed, you prove loyalty to Keth'var military code over sentimental attachment to your advisor. If you fail or refuse, you both die. Your choice." The other prisoners were being moved, leaving Caleb and Zyrenna isolated with the insurgent commander and his security detail. The trap was obvious. Force Zyrenna to execute a civilian to prove her military loyalty, or die refusing and provide propaganda about Keth'var commanders who valued humans over their own people. "You have 10 seconds to decide," the commander said. "After that, I execute you both and the choice is irrelevant." Zyrenna looked at Caleb, her expression unreadable. Then she leaned close, ostensibly to pull him to his feet, and whispered directly in his ear. "If you run, I'll execute you." The words were barely audible, her voice carrying absolute certainty. Caleb's blood went cold. She was going to do it. She was actually going to shoot him rather than refuse the commander's sick test. "Run," Zyrenna said loudly, stepping back and raising her weapon. "You have 30 seconds." Caleb stood frozen, his mind refusing to process what was happening. 6 months working together, building genuine professional respect, and she was going to execute him to satisfy insurgent demands. "Run!" Zyrenna's voice carried command authority that made Caleb's body react before his brain could override the instinct. He ran, down the corridor past damaged sections heading toward, he didn't even know where, just away. Behind him he heard her footsteps, pursuing, hunting. Caleb's civilian fitness was no match for Keth'var combat conditioning. Zyrenna closed the distance rapidly, her movements precise and efficient. He risked a glance back and saw her weapon raised, tracking him with professional accuracy. This was it. This was how he died, executed by someone he'd trusted. He heard the weapon discharge, felt the plasma bolt pass so close to his head that the heat singed his hair. He stumbled, fell, rolled behind a collapsed section of bulkhead. Zyrenna was right there, weapon trained on his position, her expression carrying something Caleb couldn't quite identify. "Stay down," she said quietly. "Don't move. Don't make a sound." Then she turned and fired 3 precise shots back down the corridor they'd come from. Caleb heard bodies hitting the ground, heard the distinctive sound of insurgent weapons clattering across deck plating. "Clear," Zyrenna said into what Caleb now realized was an active comm unit. 3 hostiles neutralized. Continuing to secondary extraction point with civilian advisor. She moved to Caleb's position, extending a hand to pull him up. Her expression was complicated, relief, exhaustion, something that might have been apology. "You thought I was actually going to execute you," she said. "Not a question." "You said if I ran, you'd execute me," Caleb managed, his voice shaking. "You were very clear. I said that because the insurgents needed to believe I would. Because if they believed it, they'd give us exactly the opening I needed. Following at close range to verify I completed the execution, far enough from their command position to be vulnerable, focused on observing rather than maintaining combat awareness." Caleb's brain was slowly catching up. "You staged the whole thing." "I staged escape attempt disguised as compliance with their demands. The execution order gave us mobility they wouldn't have otherwise permitted. Your run drew their security detail into compromised position. My pursuit gave me tactical advantage to eliminate them before they could respond." "You could have told me," Caleb said, adrenaline shifting into anger. "Telling you would have changed your behavioral responses in ways insurgents would have detected. You had to believe the threat was real for your fear responses, to be authentic enough to sell the performance." They moved through the damaged facility toward what Zyrenna identified as a secondary extraction point. A location her active comm connection suggested was being secured by Keth'var military forces. "I'm sorry I frightened you," Zyrenna said as they navigated a collapsed section. "But I needed you genuinely terrified for the tactical deception to work. Insurgents would have detected performance in your fear responses." "You used me as bait," Caleb said. "Without consent, without warning, with full knowledge that I'd believe you were actually going to execute me." "Yes," Zyrenna said without deflection. "It was necessary for optimal tactical outcome. Your genuine fear created believable scenario that insurgents accepted without question. That acceptance created vulnerability I could exploit. And if something had gone wrong, if they'd shot me before you could eliminate them, if your aim had been off by a few centimeters, then you would have died and I would have failed in my duty to protect civilian personnel under my command," Zyrenna said bluntly. "I calculated acceptable risk parameters based on my combat capabilities and insurgent positioning. The risk was significant but necessary given alternative scenarios." "The alternative being we both get executed," Caleb said. "Yes. I chose tactical option with highest probability of survival for both of us, even though that option required subjecting you to psychological trauma of believing I would execute you. The choice was between your temporary terror or our mutual permanent death. I chose the option where we both survive." Caleb thought about the whisper, "If you run, I'll execute you," and how absolutely certain it had sounded. "The brutal code you live by," Caleb said. "Keth'var military philosophy, outcome over comfort, survival over emotional consideration, mission success over individual psychological well-being. Yes, Zyrenna confirmed. It's not cruelty, it's pragmatism. I will always choose the tactical option most likely to keep people alive, even when that option involves methods that cause fear, discomfort, or psychological harm. Temporary trauma is preferable to permanent death. They reached the extraction point where Keth'var military forces had established a secure perimeter. Medical teams immediately swarmed both of them, checking for injuries, processing them through security verification. Through it all, Caleb kept thinking about Zyrenna's whisper and the absolute certainty in her voice. The brutal code she lived by wasn't cruelty. It was ruthless pragmatism focused entirely on survival, outcomes regardless of emotional cost. 3 days after the incident, Zyrenna requested a private meeting. "I've been reviewing post-incident reports," Zyrenna said. "Human diplomatic staff have lodged formal complaints about my tactical decisions during the insurgent attack. Specifically, the decision to use you as component of escape strategy without prior consent or warning. They're concerned about precedent," Caleb said, "about whether human personnel can trust Keth'var commanders not to sacrifice them for tactical advantage." "And what do you think?" Zyrenna asked directly. "Do you believe I would sacrifice you for tactical advantage?" Caleb considered carefully. "I think you'd sacrifice anyone for survival outcomes if the tactical math supported it. Including yourself. That's what the brutal code means. Outcome over comfort, survival over emotional consideration." "Accurate assessment," Zyrenna confirmed. "Does that make you unable to trust future collaboration?" "It makes me trust you differently," Caleb said. "I don't trust that you won't use me tactically or subject me to psychological manipulation if the situation demands it. But I do trust that you'll use every available method to keep people alive, including methods that are emotionally difficult or ethically complicated." That's a remarkably nuanced understanding of Keth'var military philosophy. "I've had useful perspective on the difference between cruelty and ruthless pragmatism," Caleb said. Zyrenna was quiet. "I am sorry I frightened you. Even though it was tactically necessary, I recognize the psychological cost was significant. You believed someone you developed professional trust with was going to execute you. That's trauma that doesn't simply disappear because the tactical reasoning was sound." "Are you apologizing for the decision or the cost?" "The cost. The decision was correct. We both survived a situation where alternative options would likely have resulted in mutual death, but the cost to you was real. Will you continue working with me?" Zyrenna asked. "Or do you need reassignment to commanders whose tactical philosophy aligns more closely with human values?" Caleb thought seriously. "I'll continue working with you. But I want honesty about when your tactical decisions might involve using me in ways I haven't explicitly consented to. Not advance warning that would compromise operations, just acknowledgement afterward that the manipulation was deliberate tactical choice." "I can agree to that," Zyrenna said. "Post-operation explanations of tactical decisions that involved psychological manipulation or risk without prior consent. Full transparency about methods after situations are resolved. Then we have an understanding." Over the following months, their professional collaboration continued, now with additional layer of complicated trust that came from surviving impossible situations through brutal pragmatism. "You whispered if you run, I'll execute you," Caleb said during one review session months later, "and I absolutely believed it. That level of certainty, was it performance or genuine tactical commitment?" "Both," Zyrenna said. "I needed you to believe it completely, which meant I had to be prepared to execute if tactical situation had developed differently. The certainty was real because the conditional commitment was real. If circumstances had required your execution for broader survival outcomes, I would have done it. But circumstances instead required staged escape, so that's what manifested. That's horrifying and oddly reassuring simultaneously. "Welcome to understanding Keth'var military philosophy," Zyrenna replied. "Brutal code isn't comfortable, but it's honest about prioritizing survival over sentiment, outcomes over intentions, pragmatic success over ethical purity." They were caught together in that insurgent attack. Her whispered threat had revealed not cruelty, but the brutal code she lived by. It had turned fear into a tense test of loyalty and trust where one wrong move could have meant death. Instead, it had forged a bond under pressure, complicated, ethically uncomfortable, built on understanding that sometimes keeping people alive required methods that violated every comfortable assumption about consent. Caleb wouldn't call it friendship exactly, but it was trust, strange, brutal, absolutely honest trust that acknowledged tactical manipulation as acceptable cost for survival outcomes. And in the dangerous work they continued doing together, that trust mattered more than comfort